Okay, now we know the answer to my very first question. Can I do an entire chapter in 15 minutes? The answer, sadly, no. So I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, and this will just be part 2 of week 5's learning. So I'm going to talk about judgments again. So we're going to talk about estimating the likelihood of events. So really, this has to do with, do you think there's going to be a car crash or do you think there's going to be a plane crash, right? Those are the types of events that we're estimating the likelihood of. So it's a type of problem solving in which we estimate the probability of an event, and you can solve it using algorithms or formulas, or you can also use the heuristic way of problem solving. So we tend to rely more on heuristics. And then which one we choose is kind of dependent on the situation. Is it one that lends itself more to a certain way of thinking, like heuristics, like shortcuts, or is it something that you need to have those statistics and facts and algebra? Things like that. So there are a couple of different kinds of heuristics. One is called the availability heuristic. So that is the more easily we can recall the memory for an event, the more frequently we estimate the event to be. So if there are clouds in the sky and it rains 90% of the time, when you see clouds in the sky, you're going to think, oh, hey, it probably is going to rain pretty soon. So remember that heuristics commonly use the rule of thumb kind of idea, I guess. So there's something called representativeness heuristics, and that is judging whether or not an object, event, or person belongs in a particular category. So we make judgments based on the concept of the category. For example, muscular men are more likely to be thought of as some sort of a rugged profession, firemen or construction workers or an athlete, but you don't usually think, oh, wow, that guy does taxes for a living or anything like that, right? So this is not always good because it can lead to prejudices, but it's something that we do a lot because it is a shortcut to our thinking. So sometimes you just have to kind of pull yourself out of that train of thought and realize that not everybody that likes to read and is quiet and shy and wears glasses is a librarian. They could be a waitress, they could be an actress, who knows, right? So, we're going to talk about language now. Humans have well-developed syntactical verbal systems to represent the world. So it doesn't matter what language it is. We all have kind of our subject, verb, word order to help us represent objects or concepts. So there is much of our knowledge represented in memory as words. So that's part of that episodic memory that we talked about last week, right? So a lot of our memory is stored in like storytelling types of words. So humans acquire language. If you have a kiddo, you probably already know this, or if you've taken a foreign language, also they talk about acquisition of language. But basically, everybody is born with language acquisition. So that's kind of the innate knowledge of language and syntax. So think about it like this. If you're a baby or you have a baby and you're trying to Teach them what a dog is. You don't say the dog is furry, four-legged animal, but not the same furry, four-legged animal as the cat. He's a dog. You don't ever really explain what a dog is, but as you're reading books or looking at TV shows or whatever, and you see a dog and you point it out and you're like, doggy. And the babies learn automatically, innately, it's in them, that the language doggy, the word doggy, stands for this object that looks a certain way. So now they can understand the concept of dog without us giving them a dictionary and an encyclopedia version of it. There's a nurture view, and that is language's means for communicating, problem solving. So the innate view and the nurture view are both correct. They both play a role. So babies learn language automatically. At 1 month, newborn to 1 month, they can categorize vowel sounds. So, ooh, things like that. 2 months, they're cooing. 4 months, they're babbling, and they usually pull in some hard consonant sounds like. And then by 7 months, usually give or take, the babbles become very specific to the language. So that is, and if you watch the crash course videos, which you should, that is the phoneme. That's your specific native sounds that you put them together and they create a morpheme, and then it creates words and language. So by the time babies are a year old, they can communicate with others typically, not necessarily all by words, but gestures and morphemes. So they can put sounds together like mama and have it mean something to them. So please know that this will be on the test, babies and languages, and the first month they can categorize vowel sounds. Second month, cooing. Fourth month, babbling and consonants. 7th month, the babbles are native specific. So that's if you're a Spanish speaker natively, the baby will pick up on the vowels and consonants that are most used in that language. Okay, we're almost done, believe it or not. So in bilingual households, children acquire both languages at very high levels of proficiency, and really bilingual people are just amazing to me. They have exposure in elementary school typically, and it leads to near native proficiency. So they really can get entire languages without learning every single definition of every single word. And I'm sure some of you know that have tried to learn a second language, that it gets harder the older you get to there is no more innate understanding of a different language by the time, you're an adult. Then you understand your language, and that's the door is shut for that kind of acquisition. First words are usually objects. My son's first word was hey, like hi. So he used to go around and say hey to everybody. However, usually it's objects like milk or baba or, binky or whatever. They tend to overextend a word, which means that one word, maybe doggy, symbolizes all furry four-legged animals for a little while. And then sometimes there's an underextension, which maybe they don't understand that mommy is just one lady and not all mommies. So there's also something called telegraphic speech, and that's a lot of two-word sentences that happens usually around the time they're 1.5-ish. And then between 1.5 and age 6, it is just complete rapid fire acquisition of language. So they understand the grammar of it, they understand vocabulary, and the pragmatics behind it. It's pretty amazing. All right, so let's talk about our friend Lev Vygotsky. He had he came up with a theory that he called the sociocultural theory, and basically that is the influence of language in the development of culture. Excuse me. So think about things like how the idea of climate change or global warming will affect the language of the Eskimo people, or um, basically it's the ramifications of an event on a language. Does it change things? Are they going to lose words for things that no longer are there, or actions that no longer happen, things like that. Vygotsky also says that the older and knowledgeable society members have to pass on the culture by engaging in conversations with the younger. So you're going to pass on the values, pass on the beliefs. And children store these dialogues as memory, and then they later use it when they, are able to understand more what it means. We've got the Whorfian hypothesis, which I do believe is maybe on the test. I'm 90% sure it's on the test, and I will double check and make sure. I know for sure it's on the homework. So the Whorfian hypothesis is a linguistic relativity hypothesis, and that is that language directly determines thoughts and views of the world. Um, Another way of saying it is language influences thought process. So there are strong forms of hypothesis do not hold up to research, but the weaker version, which is that it influences thoughts and processes, holds up a little bit more to research. So think of it as like slang. Slang from your generation is much different probably than slang from my generation, which is much different from slang from my grown-ups, from my adult parents' generation. So it definitely, if you are reading, and I was a literature teacher, so this kind of made a big difference, but the different slang, if you don't understand it, then you don't really understand that view of the world. So if I'm reading a book about something that happened in the 60s and I don't understand groovy, which I do, but then it's going to be harder for me to understand the whole concept of the 60s. Um, some researchers suggest animals have language abilities, and they consider the difference between language and communication. So language is a system of communication with set vocabulary, set grammar, and I think for animals, communication can be instructed. Sorry, unstructured. So think about like the famous gorilla Coco, who learned how to use sign language and could communicate concepts instead of just words for objects. It was things like, I think maybe there was something where the caretaker had a miscarriage and she understood what it meant and cried when the sign, baby dead kind of came out. So They definitely understand.